much, panelists, for being with us. I'm very excited to speak to you, ask you some questions, some probing questions. Normally, what I like to do on a panel is I like to ask you about yourselves, but I actually just want to dive right in. I know we don't have too much time, and I'd rather get insight here, and then maybe at some point you can bring up the kinds of work that you've been doing in this space. So the first thing I'm very interested in, and it was referred to today as well, Jamie Dimon hates Bitcoin but likes JP Morgan coin. As far as I know, it's not a coin. He's not trying to create a currency. He's trying to create a bank settlement type technology or something like that. I'm not sure if any of you have had thoughts on that. A bank creating a blockchain. Do you see this as a trend where banks now start building their own kinds of blockchains, or is this going to be a trend where they all try and consolidate on one sort of thing? Does any of you have something you'd like to mention around the idea of a JP Morgan blockchain or coin?
So I'll have a stab at that. So coming from our previous relationship with Barclays, I know they've also investigated that themselves quite a few years ago, and nothing really came of it because they did all this work, created a beautiful Barclays coin or whatever it was called, and realized there wasn't really a use case for it to act on their own. So in my opinion, unless you do have a presence across multiple jurisdictions, you're doing intra sort of company transfers, then yes, the network for yourself makes sense. But in the grand scheme of things, you can only really get something really going from a traction perspective if you've got a blockchain or a ledger or a coin that all the banks, or at least some of the banks, participate in and have some form of skin in the game on.
So is this going to be something that banks all come together on? I know this has probably been piloting or investigating for years now. But is there a world where we can see the banks replacing SWIFT and so on, and all settling on and coming together and agreeing on a single blockchain that makes interbank settlements and so on much more efficient? Is that a likely outcome?
The banks agreeing on where, yeah. Tanya, do you want to take that one?
Lorien, I think what we've got to do in this space is firstly just define what's a DLT project and what's a blockchain project. So that's, I think that the banks can probably get together and they can agree on what to do from a DLT perspective. It will probably bring a lot of efficiencies into the market. Operational procedures will be improved. Is it going to change the world? No, not really. It's probably not going to do that. And I think where the space is going right now is trying to work in a consortium and trying to work with banks. The conversation moves beyond the technology now. We're not having conversations around how the consensus mechanism works and how things like that work. You start having conversations around the politics and the economic model and the business case and the benefits, and it's far more complex to partner with one party, never mind, the SAFBC has 55 members. To get 55 members to agree on what to do is challenging. So I think that these things will take time. I think they're going to bring a lot of efficiencies into the back offices of a lot of the banks. But and I think they will happen, but are they going to, change the world and the way we know it today? I don't think so. And I want to add one point. I think that a lot of us and in the crypto space or the blockchain space underestimate the extent to which the tentacles of the financial markets work. This isn't a matter of switching from a Kodak camera to your iPhone, or deciding to use Uber instead of the Gautrain. The banks, or the financial markets really infiltrate every part of our economy. So trying to change them, I think it will happen, but I think it's going to take longer than what people anticipate.
Do any of you see, because of the difficulties of this, where we have all these different companies, an impossibility all coming to agree on a particular standard or something, do you think that one will emerge, a technology will emerge, a public blockchain will emerge, and because it's being used and it's tested in the marketplace, sure, it didn't come out of the banking system, but is it possible that we could see one of the cryptocurrencies perhaps, or blockchains that exist today, being adopted? Like the internet, I guess, was a public thing that was adopted.
Yeah. I think that would be the utopian dream for something like the JP Morgan coin. I mean, a lot of people saying Ripple is, it will be dead soon as a result of the JPM coin. But I think what we're seeing is a lot of banks being on the offensive now. They were very reactive as opposed to being proactive for a number of years, and now they've got a good gist of what the ecosystem entails. And as you referred to, I think they are focusing predominantly on internal efficiencies. But I think it is a utopian dream for the financial service system to have some kind of general consensus or permissionless cryptocurrency that they can transact and settle with internationally. Who's going to do that? Who knows? But I know that there are several banks working on projects like this.
Has there been any work? I know you're with 22/7.
That's right.
I actually am a customer. Have you been thinking about incorporating crypto into your platform?
So we're very new in this space, and when I say new, we're like literally newly born. So what we've done is that we're just trying to run small experiments just to see how our 22/7 customers actually work with cryptocurrency. So we've introduced cryptocurrency tracking on the actual platform. You can also link your Luna account to 22/7. And it's just the ability just to kind of see over 1,800 coins, I believe, and seeing how the market is treating it. And then with 22/7, it's how your cryptocurrency affects your investment portfolio as well as your net value. So we're trying small things. So small things, and hopefully we'll see what we'll learn and try to grow it and be more proficient as you guys in this space.
Has there been a lot of demand from your customers interested in that?
Surprisingly, not really. That it is growing. It is very new, the feature. So we're looking at about 2% of our customers already have linked their cryptocurrencies. We are growing. So even though it's a small number, it's actually quite a significant number in our space. So we'll see. It is there's some traction happening. We do get a lot of requests from our customers to include cryptocurrency buying, selling, a lot of cross kind of selling of cryptocurrencies and all of that. So it's interesting. So we're getting there, slowly but surely.
Sure. I think one of the biggest issues probably all of us are facing, when it comes to trying to reinvent systems, trying to reinvent how we deal with securities and so on, and also how we deal with payments, is the regulatory aspect. We've been very close with our Reserve Bank because we're clearly a cryptocurrency company, and we're trying to facilitate payments through merchants and cross-border and so on. Is there any insight that you can give in how a company that is now embarking either on a crypto project or a blockchain project, are there any the lessons that you learned in terms of how regulators look at things and where they may be going?
So regulators, I think, are far more open and interested in the DLT space. They have clearly recognized and shown that they can see the various opportunities that DLT can bring into the financial services sector. When it comes to crypto, however, it's a lot more of a delicate conversation. So we've also had exploratory proof of concepts within the bank, and what we've done as a strategy is to take the SARB with us every step of the way, so we can share findings with them. They can know exactly what we're up to. Nothing significant sort of has really impacted us yet, or gone out really, but it is more the message that I definitely feel is though go crazy with DLT. In fact, include us where we can and where they have capacity. But when it comes to crypto assets, they don't see it as in their jurisdiction. So it's a bit of a catch-22.
So from the bank perspective right now, cryptocurrency itself is just you're not playing there, you're not thinking about storing wallets or anything.
So there's definitely a consideration around there. So being trusted entities, we could look at wallet storage. We could look at even being a custodian or buying cryptocurrencies on behalf of clients, and therefore the cryptocurrency not even technically touching the wallet or the account of the client. In my opinion, I think cryptocurrencies, especially the ones that are existing today, the bigger ones, are going to become a form of a commodity in our markets department, an area like investment investing in gold and resources and different FXs and that type of thing. So I see it as more of an investment opportunity, especially the ones right now. I do believe there will be eventually a coin that will be global, that whether banks use it or not, but it'll become far more adopted for that peer-to-peer transfer of funds and from a purchasing perspective. I think we might not have a choice but to embrace it when it comes there, but for now I think it's more for an investment perspective.
So what's the, I guess for all of you, I mean, this has been 10 years now. We've all been trying and envisioning and being at conferences like this and talking about what's coming and so on, and there seems to be progress, but that horizon seems to keep getting pushed out, where suddenly we wake up one day and we do have a cryptocurrency that is being used in commerce. There's no issue around its legality and so on. Is this still on the horizon? Is there going to be a time where we have such a thing as a cryptocurrency, or is it just too weird that no government can ever be satisfied that they can have a finger on it, that that there'll never be a place where a regulator will think that they can stop all the money laundering? Is this cryptocurrency path we're on, is it a dead end, and is it the future just DLT, as you say?
Lorien, I sometimes think that our industry needs a break, I remember when I was at school, there were going to be robots that were going to clean our houses, but the robotics industry's taken years to get to the point where a robot can jump, and these things take time, and I think where else we're in the spotlight so much is that industries don't have a price attached to them, and we have a price. Today's price is $3,864 attached to our industry that is judging us all the time as to how well we're doing. So I think that technology takes time to come into being. There's a huge amount that needs to happen in the space before it gets mass adoption. In my view, I know that you have the view that we'll end up with one global currency essentially. I don't know if we will. When Facebook launched their cryptocurrency, or if they do, or when it happens, it's you're going to end up with 2 billion people that can automatically use that. For somebody else to try and challenge that system will be very, very difficult. So I don't know if long term we will end up with one. But I think that we are still in the very, very early phases. I think that these things are possible, but they're really going to take time. And with the hype that's happened, it's just put this industry into the spotlight, and it just needs to take a break for a bit sometimes.
I think also there needs to be more of a dialogue. It is a very fragmented space as a result of what you're saying as well, and I think there needs to be more of a dialogue between connecting the dots between the corporates, the governments, and the startups. There's so many different coins out there representing different types of value. And what we're doing at Diginex, we're one of 3 digital asset investment banks. So we're actually building our own bank from the ground up, which obviously gives us the flexibility of creating. We have a financial services division and a solutions and advisory division, whilst being in constant contact with governments and regulators as well. So it's a fine line between. I think it's going to be a very clunky way forward for a lot of the financial institutions in trying to figure get their heads around exactly what's going on and how best to move forward. But then again, they have the regulators on their side. So I think it's at the end of the day, there's going to be a fine line between connecting those dots and seeing what the bigger players do.
One of the memes was always be your own bank. And I guess for a lot of us, especially those who are technically minded, that could be a feasible thing. Where I look after my private keys and so on. But having a wallet, a non-custodial wallet, the thing we've been hit with most is most people forget their keys and they want you to recover their wallets. And we've always gone out of our way to be Bitcoin centric and think about it in terms of your own keys, but it's just not. It doesn't seem viable. Is that a meme that needs to die? The idea that if we have value, we can be our own bank. Is that something that is viable? Is that a feasible future?
I think it's going to be tricky, personally.
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, we're building out our own insured custody platform. There are very few players, such as obviously Coinbase as well, who are doing the same thing. But I foresee the future being people asking them to take care of their money, whether it's a cold storage or hot storage. But I think that is going to be the future of having these, I suppose, custodial banks essentially looking after your money. As we all know, even having your own personal wallet isn't that easy to access, or keys get lost and things happen. And at the end of the day, I think, that's a big space that not many players are in right now, which is the insured custody.
I guess also, banks, it's not just about deposits. There's other things, loans and so on. Is it possible to think of a world where banks could loan cryptocurrency or in that? Is there such a thing? I mean, talking about from an economic point of view, if we think about a lot of the time when we talk about Bitcoin as sound money, I always have to counter the argument, but we live in a modern economy and we can't have a fixed supply of currency. We need to be able to be flexible, and as the economy grows and as this and that, we need to be able to dynamically move, change the supply. Do you think it's reasonable to think of a currency like Bitcoin, which is supposed to be the fixed supply deflationary currency? Is that viable again in a modern economy, or is fiat currency our best hope that we have?
I don't see why not. I mean, there was the discussion this morning on stable coins by Carl, and he was speaking about make or die. I mean, that's essentially allowing the ability to borrow and lend crypto out in some way. So for me, it's just a different form of collateral that the banks will be able to use long term.
Like, what's the difference between a dollar denominated loan versus a Bitcoin denominated loan? I think the trick comes in terms of hedging the volatility around it. I think it will stabilize more and more, but I think that's where the banks will scratch their heads and the risk committees will get a little bit nervous. But I think once they manage to get their heads around that, why not?
So Tanya, I know that you've been involved so long in the space. You're an OG.
Thanks, you're showing my age.
So long.
Having been involved at Straight and looking at security settlement and so on, and then with Fractal as well. And I know that you were engaged working on decentralized voting and that. The progress that you've made so far since I last spoke to you, how is that turning out? The projects you're working on now.
So let me touch on, obviously the security token space is now the hot topic in the press, and I always say that I've got my soapbox about it because there's a lot of people, even South African-based RCOs, that are going out punting that they've got a compliant STO platform that complies with all sorts of regulations and that. And this space, the capital markets in South Africa particularly are working fairly well. There's always this criticism, we can't settle in real time, whatever. You can. It's not a technology issue, it's a market infrastructure issue. So for me right now, it's quite interesting to watch how the securities token space will develop, but I want to look at it more as outside of the listed entity space, because our rules right now are so strict about what you can and can't do for any listed company that anybody who's wanting to do an STO, you essentially need to be an unlisted organization and see if we actually have a market for it. I know that when I was at Straight, we used to look at companies that are delisted. Some of them had not had any volume on the shares for 6 months. They just delisted due to lack of interest. So when people say that STOs are going to be the next big thing and it's going to bring liquidity and all of that, I don't know if it necessarily will in the short term for smaller things. And in my mind, all that's happened is that everyone who was an RCO expert a year ago is now an STO expert. So you just got to change one letter in your title, and now you set for the next wave. So I'm watching that space very closely. I mean,
what we're actually seeing is we're actually advising a large e-commerce based company, UK-based company, which are doing a hybrid raise. They're raising $200 million, of which 20 million will be done through tokens, just to see exactly how it works, which is how I see the space evolving, is seeing more and more financing done through these hybrid strategies, where just being able to see that the fact of the benefits of having a security token where you can have access to a revenue stream and programmable securities for investor rights and things like that. So I think it's very much dipping one's toe in the water right now, but I think we're going to see more of a hybrid financing strategy going forward.
For sure.
So do you think you see this STO, ICO token, digital token market becoming something that's more legitimate, that our regulators will be creating guidelines for how they should be run, how money should be raised, and the promises that are being made by these companies, do they? I know that, for example, there are ICOs now that are in trouble because they raised all this money, and the people that they raised the money from actually can go and ask for their money back. I mean, there's going to be a lot of legal implications for that. So are those a lot of hard lessons that are now going to be learned that regulators are looking at now and going to be creating those guidelines, or are those guidelines already there in terms of existing securities laws and so on?
I've always, and I'll say this, I've always been a big fan of ICOs, by the way. So, because I do believe that it gave this industry and this market an opportunity, if they were done in a legitimate way, to actually reimagine finance. And working in the capital markets for so long and seeing how that system works, I thought that this was like the best thing since sliced bread. Like it was giving every entrepreneur an opportunity to fulfill their entrepreneurial dream, But then when you actually sit down and start to try and draft some laws around how it should work and some investor protection around how it should work, and you start with this blank piece of paper, you almost end up with a very, very similar framework to what we currently have in place for the existing structures. And for me, that's the challenge that the regulators are going to face. And it depends on what jurisdiction. That's the biggest thing. If you're going to do it here in South Africa, there's very clear laws on what you can and can't do. If you're going to do it in the States and apply the Howey test and get exemptions in terms of Reg D and A and that's a completely different ball game. So for me, any startups going into the space have to be very, very clear of where they're doing it. You need some damn good lawyers who know what they're talking about, and you just got to be careful with what you're doing. But I really hope that this does give an opportunity for our industry to actually enable some entrepreneurs. I really that's still my dream.
So what are the pitfalls? What are the issues? Let's say I wanted to raise money through an ICO. Are there things that I could look at to say, don't do this, do that? Because right now, it doesn't seem like there's, I mean, if I have an idea and somebody wants to give me money for it, great. But of course, then I'm going to fall foul of some law out there. So what would be a good place to go and find those rules?
So here in South Africa, step one is if anything is publicly traded, it needs to go through a licensed exchange. So we have 5 licensed exchanges in the country, and then there's a whole bunch of laws that stem from that, where you need a custodian bank, a CSD, an authorized dealer as the broker, and you end up in the current framework. And you've got to fulfill the listing requirements of that exchange. So so maybe look at another country.
But what about a security versus a utility token?
Utility tokens would be a different ball game. But if you're doing an STO as pure securities token, where it's the definition of a security, equity, bond, money market instruments, and a mutual fund or unit trust, you end up in our current framework.
So maybe it's about offering a utility token instead and bypassing the securities.
But if I frame something as a utility token, I'm promising something. I'm saying you will be able to use this service that I create in the future that I haven't yet done. So isn't that a security? I mean, just because I'm promising future value, and that's a security, right?
Well, if it can be linked to a specific service or product at that very early stage of the company, which a lot of these can't really do, then I think you can. But I think you have to be very clear in terms of what that utility token really represents, because people are using it as a workaround to do an ICO. But you just need to be incredibly clear. Otherwise, you do land in those murky waters and could be asked to pay back all your money.
Nick, you said you're advising people on ICO? Are you?
No, not ICOs, on more in STOs. Yeah,
On
that was an STO which we're working with
Could
right
you
now.
describe an STO for those initial coin offering and STOs?
Security tokens are analogous to traditional securities essentially. So we are in fact building our own institutional exchange, which will be launching in July, and that'll be headquartered out of Hong Kong. So, as I said, right now we've just started advising one company, which is a large e-commerce company, that basically is trying this hybrid strategy of raising traditional equity versus obviously the security tokens. So, I think, as I said, the advantages that come with that, obviously, the liquidity premium that comes with the fact that you can actually trade this security that would be traditional equity. As well as the fact that they're very programmable, which is the other advantage, which you don't get with traditional equity. So you being able to program investor rights, which is obviously revenue shares, cash flow rights, and I think this is where it gets exciting, is the fact that that's actually going to make the regulator's life easier as well when it comes to traditional equity versus traditional securities versus security tokens. So. Yeah, there's a long way to go, but as I said, I think the most conservative and strategy would be to have a dual-pronged approach, which one can actually see the benefits in real time of them happening, whilst obviously not putting all your eggs in one basket.
Are you operating locally in South Africa or just out?
We're global. We're headquartered in Hong Kong, but we have 10 offices around the world, and I've just started here in Africa to head up the business, which is more, we have a solutions and advisory division, so that's more advising corporates and governments on implementing blockchain into their systems. And then the financial services is more focused on Europe and America right now. So we have an OTC desk, we're about to launch our insured custody platform. Our institutional exchange will be up and running in July. So basically creating an investment bank from the ground up to provide the infrastructure for institutional capital.
And one of the things again that's been, I guess if you're in the BDC community, Bitcoin BDC, this idea that there could be an ETF. What is the likelihood of that sort of thing happening? Is this something that is imminent, or is it a pie in the sky?
I don't want to sound stupid, but I don't get the point of an ETF. In the Bitcoin, like if it's just going to be about Bitcoin, I mean, the whole point of cryptocurrencies is that, the whole point of an ETF is that you can't afford to buy the underlying asset as a whole, or you want the basket. So if it's just and maybe someone's going to have to explain this to me afterwards, but, and I'm showing my ignorance here. But the whole point about cryptocurrencies is that you can buy them in a smaller denomination of what is suitable to you. And the whole point is not necessarily to go through a custodian or something to get hold of them. So, if there's an ETF out that's a basket of various cryptocurrencies, that's fine. I don't see the point particularly of just having a Bitcoin ETF.
I think it's because of the institutional capital that wants to get exposure to this asset class.
But why don't they just buy it?
Because A, they're not allowed to right now, and B, it's sticky. It takes a while for you to actually buy it and sell it and find a buyer and a seller, and for the transaction to actually go through. So having an index tracking fund where you can actually take a position on the price without actually owning the coin is very advantageous to institutions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. I learned something.
And what's the likelihood of it happening here in South Africa? I mean, how, is that a possibility?
Come on, Kelly. Absa can do it, man.
We've definitely had quite a few conversations around it. I wouldn't be doing my job if we hadn't. But I think I think there's a few steps that need to take place, at least from a bank's perspective, before we can get to the ETF way of offering a type of a product like that. We have to just be able to buy some cryptocurrency as a bank and hold it on behalf of clients. Exactly, before we can offer derivatives.
How to treat it from an asset and tax perspective.
Exactly,
yes.
But I think that is where, if we're looking at the comment I made earlier about it being an investment asset for the future, then yes, an ETF would be one of those, or an ETN, or any other type of derivative products that will come out of there. But I think we need to get the basics right first, and I think for those basics to get right, we need the regulators on side, at least as banks. Fintechs probably have a lot more wiggle room.
Right. I want to change tack a bit. I want to touch on subjects that always can, evoke emotions. There's a lot of blockchains out there. Some are being invented right now, and some are being used. Are there any particular blockchains that any of you like? For your industry? That you see potential in, or is it really right now just everything is up for grabs? We don't know. It's all going to win. None are going to win. Do you have any opinions on blockchains specifically?
I think one of the blockchains that we're trying to, at least identify, and we did have, the speaker just spoke about it earlier, as an identifying kind of blockchain where we can actually have a central kind of blockchain, which it just allows us to actually get more information from our customers and try to get a centralizing identifier, so at least then the customer doesn't have to go through this long, laborious process of actually applying for a loan. And especially with our cooperation, our collaboration with Old Mutual, it makes better sense to kind of have something like that. So maybe that, maybe. We're not, it's still very new to us, so we're just, we're tackling probably the cryptocurrency, which is probably the easiest way to kind of explain what blockchain is. So we're just trying to touch that first, and then let's see from there.
Are there any particular platforms, though, that you see becoming successful? I know that everyone is an advocate for their own blockchain, Ethereum or whatever it is.
Bitcoin Cash.
You see, because we're 27 is an aggregator of all, so it's very hard for us to kind of pick one. But we're exploring. There's lots that offer very similar blockchains. So.
Yeah, LORIEN, it's a tough one because I think there's different dynamics to each. So some of them from a tech perspective make sense. Some of them from a consensus mechanism make sense. But then you might not like the governance or the community that's actually running it. So it's a tough one. It's like asking us what we think the price will be in 2 years' time.
Well, you could talk about currently. So from an Absa perspective, we've clearly vetted and invested in the sovereign ledger. We've become a steward. We really believe in the concept behind self-sovereign identity. When it will be really solved is a different story, but that's something we're very interested in. And I think post-Project Quorum was a massive one that showed it had a lot of potential, but this is an emerging space. It is still an emerging technology, so you do have to be agile and adaptive and open to, say, for example, a whole new ledger coming up, or one that didn't look so great, to finding a secret source and finding that secret way in which to get that adoption. But those are the two that are kind of spring to mind in my life.
And you've got to also be careful, like as an industry, like let's say the South African Financial Blockchain Consortium, you've got to be careful not to push down one road at this stage. It's just because, let's say as an industry we decided to put payments on Ethereum as part of Project Corker. It almost ties the SARB and the banking industry into that blockchain where anything else that they want to add on now needs to go down a similar path because that's what you've adopted. And I think that it's too early days to make any clear decisions on which one to go for right now. I think they've all got their advantages and disadvantages, but it's too early to commit.
You sound like a politician.
We're not really working with specific blockchains per se ourselves. We're building the infrastructure as we speak. But one we're quite interested in is OneChain, which is obviously a cross-chain protocol that's trying to plug in the existing financial service system into the blockchain financial service system. So they had a fantastic ICO, but as many of those ICOs from that era, the price has come down. But I think in terms of the team, a lot of the senior management is still there, but at the same time, I think, as you said, I think trying to bet on the right horse right now is just too dangerous, especially at an institutional level. So, so we'll see.
I think if you're building something as a startup, the Ethereum stable's probably the best and the easiest one to go to, just because they're building at all levels of the stack. There's so many plugins, there's so many spokes that are busy doing things that you can integrate. So if you're a startup, you can probably go into that space, and the support is there and the network's there. But as an institution, I don't think that's where I'm saying it's too early to make a bet.
So then, if it's too early to make a judgment on anything, really, what are you most excited about? The next few months, not the next few years, because obviously we don't know, but the next few months, what projects, are you most excited about seeing, or that you feel most hopeful about in your own industry, in your own businesses?
I think in the context of Africa, I'm very excited about stablecoins personally. I think there are lots of different types and categories that they can fall into and how they're collateralized, but there's certain projects that are purely focused on banking the unbanked in hyperinflated countries, and I think that's where it's really exciting. One can really see in a rather short space of time the actual benefits of something that is providing for people where their currency is worthless, and they have actually something where it is pegged to the US dollar, but at the same time they have the infrastructure to actually trade with it. They have the mobile money infrastructure where people forget this is the most advanced mobile money system in the world that we have here in Africa. And so stable coins, I think, are going to have a huge part to play in Africa. A lot of people are focusing on stable coins just for on-off ramping onto the larger exchanges. But when you talk about banking the developing world, that's why I'm getting really excited about it.
Just on that point, before you all share your story, the stablecoin idea, do you think that's going to be more palatable for regulators? Are they
Definitely.
okay for you to trade currencies on a platform? I mean, there's no
Yeah.
issue there, right?
I mean, one of the biggest issues with the pure cryptocurrencies is that they're so volatile. So the regulators can't protect people from this volatility that they have no control over. If it's pegged to something, I mean, still the risk of maybe some tokens being stolen is still there, but the volatility, which is one of their biggest concerns, would be eradicated. So I see so much opportunity in the stablecoin space as well.
Okay, so let me know your exciting.
So I'd say identity. I know it's come up a lot today. I think it's the backbone of the financial services industry and a lot of other industries. If you can get identity right, it'll open up so many other opportunities in this space. In order to transact, in order to do anything, you need to prove who you are. And besides the fact of owning your own identity and the power that gives you and the security that gives you, I think from an ethical perspective, it really excites me as well. And I think we're doing a lot within the SAFBC. We've been talking about the identity use case for a very long time. And thanks to Anushka and Gary and the team, it's actually grown some legs and is getting somewhere. And I think the approach is right, and it's going about it the right way. Everyone's got the opportunity to have their say and experiment, and I'm really hoping that it does continue in the momentum it's seeing, because I think that is the start. And especially if you look at the unbanked space, a lot of those people don't have identities themselves either. So that goes hand in hand. You're looking at a very different picture.
Yeah, I think it's also one of the easier conversations to have with African governments is identity.
Correct.
It's not something that's going to, as we all know, the centralized power of many African governments, it's programmed into their DNA, whereas in fact identity is something that is going to only push the nation forward, regardless of if there still exists corruption at a government level. And as you said, it is the basis and the building blocks to build off that for other sectors such as healthcare and land management and things like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Lorien, I'm only going to add to what Kelly said, because when I first started, I was saying that the SAFBC are working on DLT projects and how they're going to change the world. But these big corporates have the ability to actually change people's lives through something like the identity stream, because that industry needs some sort of governance standards, interoperability, etc. And the startups or foundations don't necessarily have the clout and the ethos, the clout to go and engage with governments, to go and speak to the regulators on how these things could work. So by getting the big corporates involved, I think that we can actually build some sort of identity and standards in South Africa where we can interoperate. The big corporates become the nodes that authenticate the data. And those are some of the use cases that long term actually can change people's lives around identity. So we're doing some good.
Ditto. No, I think it's also the identity side is that it's the easiest to kind of get people to learn about blockchain. I think it's the easiest to kind of get people to convert to kind of that space. And I think even if you're not knowledgeable in the blockchain, you kind of understand this process, and then you can kind of slowly learn that how beneficial it can be in the financial space. So to get adoption in these big enterprises and corporations is probably the easiest way to kind of get, especially in the emerging market space. Cool. So I'm very excited about that.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to open up for questions. We've got some time for questions. Has anyone got a burning question they'd like to ask the panelists?
Just for Nick. So you're saying you're creating an institutional exchange. How much money do you have to bring to play at an institutional exchange?
What, to build it or to actually
So
use it?
just how big are the companies that get in that?
I mean,
have access,
it
or is
hasn't
to
been
anyone?
launched yet, but essentially, yeah, we're predominantly focusing on the security token side of things more than anything.
Makes sense.
But we have a complementary insured custody platform to go alongside with that, which is insured. For instance, Coinbase's platform is insured by their balance sheet. We've kind of gone a step further, and we have Lloyd's Insurance who are actually insuring our custodial platform. So it's about creating the ecosystem. We're not entirely sure who our clients are going to be at this stage, but yeah, we're looking for a July launch, and yeah, as I said, I think security tokens are going to be a big part of that.
So just to ask again, then, would it be accredited investors that would get on that platform, or could any investor access it after you've listed a security token?
It would be accredited investors.
Thank you for the discussion. My question is actually for the moderator, if that's okay.
Sure.
This morning you raised a really brilliant dilemma and ideology of one chain rules them all versus multiple smaller chains. How would your theory stand to the theory of an African currency, maybe hosted by the AU, and something that is backed by all 54 states?
Well, there's two things there. When I say that I think there's going to be one coin, I'm not as maximalist as that. I'm not saying that they all will disappear. But I just look at, again, an analogy from the internet, and when I think about global trade, it just makes sense to have a currency that is accepted everywhere, and you don't need friction, foreign exchange and so on to get in and out of. So it's not that I'm so dogmatic about there can only be one. I just think that it'll make more sense if there is one global currency that doesn't require any friction to trade in and out of. That's just how it works when it comes to trade. You want the least friction. So I'm not saying that there won't be other currencies. There may very well be. There will be so many niches and so many things. Now, as for an African currency, it's quite easy to put a currency on a blockchain. So, if we have a blockchain that is universal in terms of its global and it's supported globally and so on, then it's quite easy to see a currency. In fact, I see that happening very easily. All local currencies, the rand, being on a blockchain. I mean, we see the great work that Peter and everyone's doing at Ikoka and so on. So it's very likely that that's going to happen. But the way it's going to get there, to me, is, in my mind, is that we need to have something that becomes globally accepted. And I just see that coming through a currency that is globally accepted. And once we have a currency that is globally accepted, we then have the distribution and the kind of critical mass for us to then start looking at that blockchain and saying, wow, this is really useful. We can trade securities globally on this blockchain, or we can trade things globally on this blockchain. So it's just a natural progression, if you ask me. And I think it's going to be hard for a company like JP Morgan to say, look, here we have a blockchain and it's beautiful, it's so secure and it's so fast, to get adoption. When we look at cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, it grew organically. We didn't have to buy into anybody's, a company that was trying to sell us something. I'm not a Ripple hater. There are a lot of Ripple haters, but I can see why Ripple's got to struggle. They're going to have to convince people, industries and organizations and banks and everybody that they're unbiased and they're neutral and they're
decentralized.
It's a very difficult thing to do when you come in, and that's why when it comes to Bitcoin, I mean, even if you look at cryptocurrencies like Ethereum, that's very attached to Vitalik Buterin, or as soon as you attach something that is so personal, all of us, especially when we talk about currency, to have a face attached to it. It suddenly makes it less desirable, and now suddenly you associate that thing with that person. If you don't like that person or that ego or whatever, then it's hard for you. And Satoshi Nakamoto was cool because we never got to see his face. He was just this myth, and that's why Bitcoin kind of was so palatable and so on. So, I just see a logical step-by-step progression into how things are going to evolve. But of course, I don't know the future, and I might be completely wrong.
My question goes to Nick. Okay, so do you think most exchanges are going to start switching from utility tokens to security tokens? And again, on the accredited investors, what is your benchmark or the benchmark to determine accredited investor?
I think, well, to answer your second question, I think accredited investors, it will be in jurisdictions where those are regulated investors who can access the institutional exchange. Whether or not the utility versus security question, I think time will tell. It's too early to tell. I mean, there are very few people in the world right now, or companies that are actually building out institutional exchanges right now. So who knows how that will pan out, whether or not it will make a dent in the current market, and whether that's the traditional security market or the utility token market. But at the end of the day, it's not easy to do, but there is demand, significant demand from institutions to actually access this asset class, and actually get some sort of exposure to that liquidity premium that security tokens offer.
So, the panel was about enterprise blockchain and finance, and, working for a financial institution myself, it does seem to be the common sentiment towards blockchain and cryptocurrencies. Generally, it's lukewarm to, oh my God, now I'll never touch this thing with a 10-foot pole. And ultimately what we see is a lot of like DLT type solutions, very closed networks. And I'm just wondering about, this notion of exponential technology. And the fact that, just in some of the examples that we've seen in the last few years, I mean, Binance is 2 years old, and they do like a daily average volume of about like $1 billion. MakerDAO, which is the stable coin, does about, I think there's something like, like 70 to $80 million like locked up in loans, and it's a year old. The Lightning Network is a year old, basically has about $3 million in channels for micropayments. So the point is from nothing to, the valuation of Binance alone, I won't even go there, but the point is that these companies have come from nowhere and have gone practically straight up. And now we're starting to see more sophisticated financial instruments and financial features coming up, like exactly what DAI is doing. So this notion of decentralized finance applications are showing up. What I'm wondering about is that, do you think that South African banks almost have like a feeling of complacency, or a feeling of just, I'm good with this, I don't need to actually jump on? But when we think about the wave of fintechs that have come, and the banks initially tried to crush them, and now we partner with them, challenger banks that are showing up all over the place, that are providing services to customers. We look at another trend like PSD2, which is effectively mandating that banks have to open up all their services and ultimately become commoditized. How are the leadership of banks actually responding to this kind of disruption? I mean, crypto is one element of it, but there's all these processes and features and new paradigms for finance that talk directly to customers and are willing to solve their problems immediately. How, ultimately, from a leadership perspective, how do you feel South African banks and financial institutions are actually responding? What's their answer to this? It can't just be, oh, it was once used to buy drugs and therefore I'll never take it.
I think there is senior leaders, at least from an Absa perspective, are very aware of this technology. I know Maria's been involved in quite a bit of the ID 2020 conversations at Device. But the progress you make is as good as your leaders' buy-in. And buy-in, I don't just mean knowing about it. They have to be fully invested in it and behind it and trust it. I think it's still at the stage, at least from our perspective, where there are a certain few, and we're lucky enough that there are at least relatively senior, that really believe in it and want to push it. But you do need that mass momentum across the bank to actually get going. Because at the end of the day, banks have a lot of other stuff on the go. Blockchain is great, but right now we're trying to sort of improve the bank, digitize it, continue keeping the actual beast running. So to fight for that capacity and that focus to use blockchain is a lot harder than you'd actually think. So a large part of what we do within my team is around educating and getting the right types of people on board, like compliance, risk, financial crime, all of those guys on board and comfortable with it. And as you get that momentum, you'll start seeing, I think, banks slowly starting to move. The analogy we always use is, takes a lot to steer a really big ship versus a teeny tiny little jet ski. So we're trying, there are a few of us working on it, but you do need that senior level buy-in.
Cool. Thank you very much, Tanya, Kelly, Nick, Justin. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Lorien.
Thank you, Lorien.
Thank you very much.